Hey, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. It's V the Guerrilla Economist coming to you live with my main man, Mathew. Needs no introduction. And folks, if you haven't gotten a chance to hear Mathew speak, go back and listen to the last two shows that we did. Truly remarkable, truly incredible. Make sure you check it out. And without further ado, Matt, there's a lot of things going on, and we need to dissect the false narratives from truth, buddy. So what's going on?
Absolutely. Well, I think right now there's obviously this race to determine the new paradigm is hot, and coming out of the Republican Party convention, what we see right now is one last gasp for hope coming out of Trump. And I got to say that there was a lot of unimpressive presentations at the Republican Party convention, but compared to the Democratic Party convention presentations, it was a breath of fresh air, especially reading some of the things that Trump had said about the need to bring uh, to return to that orientation that America lost with John F. Kennedy's death, and put a human being, a woman, back onto the moon for the first time, and to put Americans onto Mars, and have that define what America's goal is and identity will be over the coming decades and centuries. That's vital, because currently it's, I think, pretty much well known across the board in all places that matter that the current financial system that's been bailed out, really, it started completely blowing out in 2009. We lost the financial system back then, but we've sort of kept it on blood transfusions by just pumping blood into a zombie corpse for a decade, even more, by bailouts. So perpetual infusions of cash out of thin air to bail out too big to fail banks in Europe and North America, which, if they had collapsed, been permitted to melt down as they rightfully should have, it would have resulted in a chain reaction meltdown globally. And something similar to what happened in Weimar in 1923 would have happened, except obviously with 21st century characteristics in Weimar in 1923, when hyperinflation did strike and destroy the German economy in a controlled way. It didn't have to happen. That there were no derivatives. Obviously, computer gambling, was not a thing. So you could say today the bubble's much bigger, hyperbolically. There's more people on the earth at a higher standard of living than there was 85, 100 years ago. So the fall will be harder than it was then. But the point is, there's a race to define who will determine the rules of that new system. Now, what Trump said about all space and the need to infuse that type of goal orientation is vital to reinform what new system of values will take over in what we hope, and people who have been watching our shows and your shows especially for a long time know that the multipolar alliance led by the BRICS, or specifically Russia and China, and the Belt and Road Initiative,
Right.
that is vital that become hegemonic, because it's based upon the respective sovereign nation states, and it's based upon an active form of credit in society where money is subservient to higher needs of nations and peoples, which you can, I mean, that's the only thing, right? Money is going to be, it's going to be there whether you like it or not. There's money that's an invention of man. It's better than carrying eggs around on your back, or whatever you want on your back to do bartering. So it's a fine innovation to have little bills of credit. And a lot of people, I just say this because I just encounter so many ideologues who just say the world we don't need money, whatever. But the question is this money going to be a servant or a master on behalf of a higher oligarchical elite? So the Belt and Road Initiative demonstrates how nation states can take control, can be in the driver's seat, and ensure that the profits, what private companies do, private enterprises, is both good for them because they make profit by building high-speed rail infrastructure, water projects. You're going to make money, a lot of it, but it's also good for the nation and good for all of humanity by stabilizing the world, getting rid of hunger. You're creating a more prosperous climate, right? Less ability to divide and conquer when people have a full belly and security for the future. So that is very good. So what Trump said by going to space, which is also in alignment with the Russian-China programs for lunar development, Mars colonization, resource extraction on the moon, asteroids, and other things, where there's a lot of resources that we don't even have on the Earth. That's really vital. He also said a second thing on Lincoln, on the need to bring back the Republican Party of Abraham Lincoln, which is a very different thing than what we've seen under the days of Dick Cheney, Bush, and you can name most Republicans of the 20th century, and you'll just find a lot of disasters that were. So those two ideas really struck out at me from his speech. And now, if you compare that to what is being proposed by the City of London and Wall Street as their solution to the oncoming economic collapse, I think you can start getting a very interesting lesson in thinking and thinking in a fruitful way, because they're saying a lot of truthful things. We brought up in our little discussion before this interview the new developments in Canada, and Canada, I mean, right now being used as a role model for the world. So the City of London has orchestrated bringing Mark Carney, a Canadian who was a former Goldman Sachs investment banker, who, while he was doing that for over 15 years, was helping to create the bubble that is now popping. But then in 2008, he was brought into a new career path out of Goldman Sachs and into the Bank of Canada, where he created a new image for clean conservative banking. That's sort of the image that's being projected as the Canada model that the world should adopt, because we didn't somehow we didn't suffer as bad during 2009. Afterwards, Carney, and this is, I'm just saying some things because he's such an important character, and he's being used right now to set up something very bad that contrasts with what Trump is trying to do in a very interesting way. But afterwards, he was brought in 2011 to take the keys over from Mario Draghi, who's another Goldman Sachs man, who was running the Financial Stability Board for the Bank of International Settlements. This is something he did for about 5 years, which is the regulator for global derivatives. So the very same weapon of mass financial destruction that's been created, which is derivatives. It's $1.2 quadrillion bubble that's ready to blow out in a controlled way, much in the same way that the bubbles in 28 were popped that created the Great Depression. There's something similar happening now. So Carney was in charge of that, while then being brought into England to be the first non-British governor of the Bank of England since this private central bank was set up in 1694. First time a foreigner was brought in. Now that his term is over as of March of this year, he's serving a new role, which is sort of the same role with a new emphasis as the UN ambassador on climate change. He's a lead organizer for the oncoming UK COP26 summit, where they hope to bring in a new green bankers dictatorship to follow through on the Green New Deal for the world, a great global reset using COVID as a cover. So that's his job. In Canada is sort of, they want to make that a trophy role model for the world to adapt to. So right now, Parliament was prorogued on August 16th. You know what that means, by the way?
Could you break that down for our audience?
Okay, yeah. Basically, in a British parliamentary system, it's a very weird system where if the Governor General approves, the Governor General being the actual head of state of a Commonwealth country, it's not the Prime Minister. That's just the person who's there, who's chosen by the parties. But the actual official head of state is the monarch, and her hand of power is the Governor General, whether that's Australia or whether that's here. It's the same thing. And if they approve of a request to shut down the democratic part of a British imperial government, which is the Parliament, then it just happens unilaterally. So that's what was announced on August 16th. Mark Carney, 5 days before, was brought in and was announced to be the head of the it's a post-pandemic task force to reorganize the Canadian financial system according to the new realities of the mass unemployment, the fact that the protections that have been keeping people in their homes is going to expire, as it will in the United States and elsewhere. And the debt has skyrocketed, to $340 billion very quickly. Now, he's in charge of that, and they need to basically get rid of all potential democratic resistance that might happen in the context of the types of vast changes that they want to put through in short order. So Parliament was shut down. Chrystia Freeland, our Oxford technocrat and the technocrat whisperer here in Canada, she was made finance minister, and a certain scandal was concocted around the Canadian government giving money to a charity that benefited some of their family members. It's just this, it's obviously a scripted thing, but that was used as justification to oust the former finance minister, get her in power, so that she's going to be collaborating with Mark Carney at creating this great green reset while Parliament is shut down until September 26th. At which point they hope to unveil a brand new model for the world based on new values. Now, Carney is big on new values, and he's been speaking aggressively for a number of months now on the need to tie value to reality. And this is what I was saying earlier, right? That these guys are all saying, the neoliberal model has come to an end, but we need now reality to define what economics and profit is. And he's been doing that for a while. Now, this is where the fraud comes in. Sounds the same as what Trump or what Lincoln did, or what Trump is trying to do, or what the Belt and Road is. It's the very opposite, because they're saying we need to incentivize monetarily contracting human activity on the earth under the guise of reducing the carbon footprint. And we do this by what they're announcing is, well, where's the money going to come for green grids to cover the world? Because windmills, solar panels, nobody really wants to invest in them. Every time that it's been done, prices of energy skyrocket. People can't afford it. It happened in Ontario a few years ago when they forced a green energy program, and household energy prices quadrupled. That's 4 times. It was a complete embarrassment and a failure. So this is what happens every time. And the only way that they can avoid this type of mass increase in energy prices, or at least reduce them, is by vast government taxpayer subsidies to the companies like Solyndra or others that are producing these solar panels at a cost of 10 to 20 times more than it would cost per kilowatt hour of, like, let's say, a natural gas plant or a nuclear power plant. Of course, you're not allowed to build those under the Green New Deal mentality, because those things increase the carbon footprint. They basically increase humanity's ability to sustain itself, which is foreboding. So what Carney is proposing now in his program that he's been laying out is green bonds. So basically have the Bank of Canada or the Canadian National Infrastructure Bank, which those things could be positive tools under a sane policy to emit credit for the development of infrastructure. He's saying, no, let's use these to emit green bonds so that the citizen and companies can now invest in 5 to 20 to 30 year or more green bonds tied to the greenification of our nation and the world. Right there, that's again trying to say, okay, we're going to make it financially profitable for individuals to participate in the destruction of their own nation.
Right.
The other thing is he's also managing alongside Michael Bloomberg the task force for climate-related financial disclosures, which was set up last year. And this is something which they're proposing. They basically want every company in the world to showcase what activities that company invests in, which is dirty, is not green, or that disrupts the natural equilibrium of nature in some way. Sorry, 1 second. Yeah, sorry. So this means if they emit carbon dioxide, which these computer modelers want us to believe is the primary cause for climate change, and well, specifically global warming, then you will not get a loan. If you do want to stay in business, you will need insurance, but that insurance is going to be under such heavy premiums that you as a dirty company will not be able to pay your insurance and your premiums. You will go bankrupt. So they want to, because you're a sinner, basically, a dirty brown, not green sinner. So you won't get loans. And one of the things that Mark Carney has celebrated as a role model of this great way of doing business under his idea of the Green New Deal is his former employer at Goldman Sachs, which he says this is a great exemplar of the way things should be. Citigroup is also another example of this, or Citibank, where he says, oh, it's so great that they no longer allow loans for companies that are doing offshore oil drilling or Arctic development or coal development. how great if only every company, every bank in the world could also choke companies that we disapprove of from credit. Now, of course, any company that's actually working with the China Belt and Road Initiative in Africa or Asia, that's actually building projects that have meaning and long-term value, they wouldn't be able to exist under Carney's world. And he said so. That those who, he said something to the exact effect that those who adapt to these new values and these new standards will prosper and be financially rewarded, and those who fail to will go extinct. He said that in September of 2019 at a Jackson Hole Banking Summit, or August. The other thing is that one of his colleagues, another technocrat, warned that if the Bretton Woods system is not reformed under this Green New Deal model, that they're aware that China's Belt and Road Initiative, the renminbi, are going to become, in his words, the New World Order. This is something that they're afraid of because they want to control the script. They are control freaks. So if you compare that, okay, you got two visions in your mind. You've got the oligarchical version of how the world order and world economy should be wired, which is we have 8 billion people. That's far too many, too much potential for disequilibrium, individuals becoming leaders, introducing new ideas, new discoveries that we don't monopolize, we can't control. So that population has to be contracted. And so the field of the means of supporting the world population needs to be contracted. You can't just tell people go jump off a cliff, or let's take a lottery. One out of every 2 people, or whatever, 2 out of every 3 people are going to have to drink Kool-Aid to fall into equilibrium with Mother Gaia. You can't say that. Nobody would do it. So what they have to do is they have to say, well, it's for your own good. We have to stop global warming. It's a crisis that will destroy everything, and it'll be global Armageddon, and we'll be underwater by 2050 if we don't act now. And since people weren't doing that for the past few decades, in spite of the hysteria that they'd been, people like Al Gore and others, Prince Philip, had been trying to get us into, people, China, India, other countries, America, Europe, they didn't want to just all collectively commit suicide all at once. There was still a lot of resistance. So the COVID narrative has been very useful to try to accelerate that mass suicide pact. So that's one thing. If you cover the world in green infrastructure, energy grids, you won't be able to melt industrial iron. You won't be able to do the type of work needed and produce qualitatively the capital goods needed to support 8 billion people or more at any quality of life worth living in. That will intrinsically force the contraction of the species in ways that are just unfathomable. I mean, it might, these computer modelers in their ivory towers who are really attached to the green agenda might really like this sort of thing, and it looks all clean and good on their computer screens. But people don't just take population reduction and food scarcity very well. They tend to it would become global chaos. It's not something that an oligarchy could actually manage, except maybe as a game theory computer model. The other view, the better view of Lincoln and of the American system that Trump has tapped into, at least conceptually, he's tapped into it on a variety of mechanisms in terms of his return to the protective tariff, overthrowing British free trade policies like the Trans-Pacific Partnership or NAFTA. The actual American system of political economy that came out of the ashes, that came out of the American Revolution, is a very different thing, because it's also tied to valuing physical variables that we live in, not just worshiping money on a market, but those variables are tied to the future and how well you can increase the carrying capacity of the species by investments into infrastructure, science, technology, new discoveries, R&D. So things that actually allow you to sustain more people at a higher standard of living than you could have without a space program or without Tennessee Valley Authority, which was built up under the New Deal under Roosevelt in the 30s, which brought electrification right to the backwater South that had 80% illiteracy before it was built. They had hardly any electrification, very low quality productivity in the farms. in the Tennessee Valley area or any of the adjacent states during the pre-New Deal years. Afterwards, illiteracy went down to 5-6% by the end of the 50s, and it became an industrial hub where some of the biggest hydroelectric projects were built that gave birth to the aerospace industry of America, and NASA benefited by that. So, whether you're increasing or contracting that carrying capacity and whether money is serving either intention is really where the fight's at. Lincoln understood this as well. I don't know if you want to talk about any examples in history of when this was done, or if you want to talk about something else.
Yeah, let's go into that.
Okay, sure.
Matt, you're gonna have to do most of the talking because when I speak, I guess because there's not a mic, I'm getting a lot of reverb back. So, now it actually sounds okay. All right, cool. So yeah, let's go into that, man. Let's talk about some examples and why this is so prevalent about and why it's so important to frame the narrative properly. Because the key thing here, folks, is this: what they're proposing. People talk about the Georgia Guidestones. People talk about depopulation agenda, climate change, how that's all linked. This has everything to do with it. And this whole Green New Deal that, Matt's really getting into the crux of the matter here, and he's really starting to unpack it, is very important that you guys get it. This is the depopulation agenda. This is what it's all about in terms of controlling the population, bringing it down to quote unquote, whatever these technocrats, whatever their fetish number is, which is 500 million or 500, about 500 million or so, globally managed and in balance with nature. It is sickness to the max. So go ahead, Matt, if you can give us some breakdown of that for us.
Yeah. No, it absolutely is sick, and it's a complete denial of the nature of mankind, because these people are committed. When you live like a beast, it's an act of free will if you're a human being. You could choose to act like a beast or not. Now, the oligarchy and the way that oligarchs, whether it's in Asia and Asian history or whether it's in the European cultural matrix, there's evidence of organizational forms of society around oligarchism for going back as far as the records show.
Right.
Oligarchs think of themselves as alphas, genetically superior. Before they knew about genetics, there's still an idea of your blood. Going back to ancient Sparta and the Roman Empire, and beforehand in Babylon, there's an idea that your blood and your family bloodlines determine the quality of your being, and that determine whether you are born into a master or a slave position in society. Of course, there's the intermediaries where a master class requires managers, so they can reward some of the slaves that are well behaved to do some of the grunt work for them, and a whole organizational ethic and structure is created out of that, whether it's the triad system that the HSBC Bank cultivated, or whether it's the mafia systems in the West that were created by Mazzini in Italy, and who was a tool for Palmerston in the British Foreign Office. Whatever it is, there's the managerial class. The Oxford Rhodes Scholars and the Fabians happen to be two active ones for the 20th century and into the present. But there's an opposing view of mankind, which is very important for people to really think deeply about, which is philosophically a different paradigm from the view that man is just another animal. Now, the thing about being another animal, like the oligarchy thinks of themselves, they just think of themselves the alpha animals on top of the betas, the gammas, and the lower useless eaters.
Hey, Matt, keep talking. It's got to take an office delivery.
Of course.
Keep going.
So the only difference is if you are one of the lower castes, then you will have to abide by the same boundary conditions that other species of rabbits and wolves and monkeys have to abide by. So when we look out into nature, we see that there are forms of self-regulating systems in every ecosystem, and populations don't behave the way human populations do. So rabbits, when they grow too much, if let's say you have a bountiful year where there's a lot of food in their environment, they will grow a lot, reproduce a lot, and adapt to that new potential. But when there's a drought, their populations collapse naturally. Mommy rabbits eat baby rabbits, and the population just dies off. They starve, and the weak go away. Some of the stronger ones are fit to survive and adapt to the scarcity. And, you know, hopefully there's some abundance in the next cycle, the next season. But you won't get any, their entire potential is defined by their genetic stock and their environment. So external and internal variables are really what limits their ability to change their potential in their actual populations. With humans, it's a little bit different. So if we choose to limit ourselves to considerations of environment, adapting to your environment and your genetic stock, right? You're just born in a family prone to criminal activity, irregardless of the fact of the socioeconomic conditions that you live in that society. They you know, there are people who are of a eugenics mindset, thinking that, well, that's just because your DNA makes you inclined for criminal activity. Your children and unborn grandchildren are defined by those same limitations, says the eugenicist. If you impose those standards of the law of the jungle onto human civilization, you will get certain results. The oligarchy is committed to doing this. Having 8 billion of our species living at 80 to 100 years of age is unacceptable. It's not something you find in nature. It is only the effect, and this is what the oligarchy, any oligarch, will never admit this openly, but it's the fact that we can do this is tied to human creative reason and our ability to create new discoveries in arts and in science that we translate into new inventions, new forms of productivity, bringing electricity into your household so you don't have to go to bed when the sun goes down if there's no wood available to burn. All of these things are the effect of the only infinite resource, which is the mind, right? So every resource comes and goes. As far as, you know, we don't burn wood in industrial civilizations in our house to stay warm or to cook our food, because we moved from burning purely wood into discovering how coal can be used. This other black rock actually burns at a higher density more efficiently than wood does. And then you could create things like coke as another form of carbon resource. And then eventually they discovered that this black ooze that would that farmers were pissed off with if they found their farmland to be on top of this black ooze, it would reduce the values of farms before the 19th century, before the 1860s, 1870s. That was not a good thing. And then it was only with the mind's ability to discover how this could be burnt, harnessed, and applied to things like steam combustion engines, that oil became a resource. Formerly, it was not something you wanted. And then as a resource, because we had value in our society for oil, right, that oil then became something that people were willing to pay for. The value of it increased. And as it increased, the value of coal or wood for the same purpose decreased accordingly. In the age of the atom, discovering that there's a lot more, hyperbolically more energy locked in per volume of matter that could be unlocked in uranium, plutonium, or thorium, or beyond, you see that the values of oil or natural gas goes down if your society transitions to the new and more efficient form of energy use. Every time you make one of these leaps, there's a whole new set of potentials for discoveries, for fields of action that you couldn't have forecast in the previous system, right? You couldn't know. You had to do it and then discover what was available for us. So the point is that the only invariant in this process as the infinite source, the constant source of value, the infinite resource, is the mind itself that discovers laws of nature, translates them, and itself is a constant resource that transcends your individual life, because we're building on ideas that were made and discoveries that were made before we were born, right, and they will continue to reverberate long after we die. So this is something which has been a clash going back to the days of Plato. If you read some of the dialogues of Plato and his approach to the sophists who had permeated the Athenian culture and were destroying that society's ability to use its own resource, the mind, properly by imbuing young, talented people, young, talented in that society's day, it was mostly men going into politics, and saying, look, you could develop for money, we could teach you the art of rhetoric, the art of persuasion, so you don't actually have to know what you're talking about. You just have to use beautiful language to win friends and influence people. And Plato and some people who were followers of Socrates recognized this destruction of their society's primary resource of the mind, which also is tied to your morality, because the less you can think and the more ignorant you are, the less you're able to hold yourself accountable for your own lies, because if you don't believe in truth, you don't believe in lies. If you don't believe in lies, how does your conscience feel bad if you've just lied? Because there's no truth, right? So your natural that society's moral ability to sustain its own existence is diminished, and corruption is just, it's like a fertile soil. So Plato was always trying to inoculate people to that through his dialogues, which is why if any of your readers have a chance to really take some time off of Netflix and just pick up some of these short Platonic dialogues and work through it, it's really incredible how your own resource is going to be enhanced, because your ability to wield your mind is what the oligarchy doesn't want you to do, to discover how you can think about thinking in a more and more fruitful way, by thinking about, well, what assumptions do I have that I didn't evaluate that might be something I'm taking for granted that is shaping my opinions of things that I feel very strongly about, but I may not have actually discovered why they're true or not. And so by constantly reflecting on your own thinking, you're able to then realize, okay, I was wrong here. I thought I was right, but I was wrong, and I'm gonna look for a new hypothesis that's more truthful. Now, the American Revolution, if you actually read the writings of people like Ben Franklin, instead of reading, because a lot of people they like reading about historical personalities, but don't do that. Just take the time to read Ben Franklin's writings on electricity or on philosophy or whatever, on politics, and you start seeing that he and some of the best of the founding fathers of America were themselves very strongly Platonic thinkers. They situated their own mind in a Platonic philosophy, which didn't suppose, the way the Aristotelian philosophy presumed, that there were a fixed order to nature, that some people were born masters, some born slaves, that there was one justice for the slaves, one justice for the master, one justice for the husband, one justice for the wife. No, that's what the Aristotelian would say. They do not, and Aristotle actually says so in his ethic, his Nicomachean Ethics, that there's everything I just said there. That's Aristotle. The Platonists would say no. There's one justice, and that justice must be common for everybody if it's to merit the name justice.
Yeah.
Ben Franklin, Washington, Hamilton, John Quincy Adams later, the best of the best were always Platonists. They talked about it. They were self-aware of that. And they knew that what Plato was trying to do by create a society of philosopher kings, where every individual would be able to become a philosopher, and or whether the kings, the leaders, would be able to become philosophers. Ideally, you want the best of both worlds, but it's a process. That's what Plato was trying to get at in a negative proof in his Republic, by demonstrating that if you have certain assumptions in the Republic, which characterize human nature in the same way that you would characterize the training of a dog or a condor, if you believe that that's how you could think about training your leaders, is by training your dogs, then you will create societies that are ultimately fascist and will become tyrannical. That a tyrannical system will suppress the people to the point that a revolt will happen. You'll have a democracy which is ruled by the mob, but the mob, that doesn't create conditions of stability. So at a certain point, to reign in the chaos, you're going to need a democracy, a warrior class, or some strongman to come in to maintain order, and then that'll evolve until you get something else, and you'll have a constant cycle of one form of government to another. But forever, you're going to be stuck to that endless purgatory unless you can break the paradox, which is that the nature of man is not an animal. And Plato is very clear that we have a Promethean spark, and he says so in the Protagoras dialogue and the Philebus dialogue, that every human being actually has a divine quality, as well as a bestial quality, but it's the divine quality that makes us human. And it's that ability that allows us to self-consciously reflect on our mind, with the way the animals cannot do, and modify through free will our behavior in accordance with those new discoveries. So the idea of a republic that Plato was aiming for was always, it didn't succeed in his lifetime. He did have an Academy of Athens. He did have political networks that were trying to resist Persia and the Persian Empire that was sort of like in those days, kind of like the American military industrial complex is today to their controllers in London, where the true high priests of power sit, controlling this dumb giant as its marcher lord to suppress the world since the death of John F. Kennedy. That was sort of what Persia was back in Plato's day in regards to Babylon and the Babylonian priesthoods of Marduk that had controlled the military structures and the political class of Persia, which was always at war, trying to destroy Athens and this quality of culture that Plato and before him Solon and Aeschylus had embodied. So Plato died without seeing this in his lifetime, but the next 2,500 years has been a constant struggle between these two networks, or these two paradigms. And we see that clearly with people like St. Augustine, who fought for his version of the Republic is illustrated in the City of God during the collapse of the Roman Empire, right? And that man's law is only legitimate if it squares with God's law and the law of creation, and that we can fathom a society where all human law is obedient, and that includes economic law, whether you spend your money or your gold on building armies to suppress the weak, or whether you build it on internal improvements, canals, or schools for orphans, which is what we saw under Charlemagne, who was an Augustinian a few years after Augustine died. And that was another effort to counteract the oligarchical system and the families that always ran it with their fondies and trusts from the days of Babylon and Rome to the present. So the American Revolution came out of that process. It came out of the better parts of England, people like Thomas More, who envisioned his republic in the form of utopia.
Right.
When he was fighting to try to get across a strategy with other humanist Platonists in his time under Henry the Seventh and Eighth, that we need to get to this newly discovered world across the ocean and set up a new form of government that is far enough removed from the empire and all of its corruption in the old world. So the Utopia book, which is again a very small book, it's a one-day read. People should read these things. Erasmus was a big part of that. They were fighting for this idea to manifest itself out of the realm of pure ideas and into an actual form of reality. And the only time that had finally happened, it took a long time, but it was in 1776, after decades and decades of effort by people like James Logan, Ben Franklin, Logan's student, and others who were followers of this Augustinian Platonic tradition, and they finally were able to achieve it. The problem by 1783, and this is going to get us back. I mean, I promise you, I don't want to go off on too much of a circuit, but I'm going to tie this back into the Green New Deal and the depopulation agenda. Is that they were bankrupt. So, and this is what Trump is tapping into today by invoking Lincoln and this space program. They were bankrupt. So people who had given 6 years of their lives between 1776 and 1883, when the Treaty of Paris was signed, the people who devoted so much of their life and their families and died for this idea to happen of creating for the first time a self-government for, by, and of the people, founded on natural law and not the obedience to hereditary structures of power, that sort of representative republic, they were about to lose it all, but very quickly. And the Articles of Confederation were an attempt to try to sort of unify the 13 states that were brand new. They were totally bankrupt. Every state was bankrupt. Every state had their own currency issuances, their own protective tariffs. There was no free trade even amongst the states. Right. So you couldn't really build an economy. They were still agrarian because that's all the British ever let America be, was, you know, a cash cropping source for the London textile industry.
Correct.
And every time America tried to have shipbuilding or ironworks, it was always destroyed by the city of London. Every time, going back to the 1640s.
Huge. A very important point right there. The resistance to industrialization, they understand, Mathew, very well, that is the linchpin. That is the key to set civilizations free. Like you made the valid point. Why there's such a pushback to stop real energy development? Like they go into these African countries. Here's a windmill. Here's a solar panel. You cannot get advanced metallurgy done, or advanced chemical fusions and catalysts, all these things that are needed to springboard society into the next generation, into the next millennium. You can't do it unless you have the very source material, which is the energy to do so. And it's so insidious that these Satanists, Mathew, for lack of a better word, Satanists are behind this. It's crazy. They're nihilistic.
Yeah. Well, this is what Benjamin Franklin was infiltrating. When he went into he was basically deployed at a young age to go into to London to do intelligence on behalf of Cotton Mather, who was a leader of the Neoplatonic movement in the 1700s, early 1700s, who was a big fighter for having industrial works and manufacturers in America. The British had completely taken over, or the British, I mean, the oligarchy had, and their powers from Venice had transplanted themselves to Amsterdam and had initiated just recently at that time a glorious revolution to transplant a Dutch king, William of Orange, into London as the new king, who didn't even speak English. And that basically allowed the Venetian party, who were sort of in the midst of a migration to try to find a better geopolitical terrain, to set up shop in an environment that would be less inclined for attack, because the lagoons of Venice were becoming a sort of weak spot, easy to attack. There's a whole story there. So they saw Amsterdam, and then more importantly, Great Britain on the Isles, as a very useful zone to do that. So they transplanted their puppet king, and they set up the Bank of England at that point in 1694 with Isaac Newton as the treasurer of the mint, which he did as a job until he died in the 1720s, and was a ruthless bastard, committing everybody who basically forged a coin to death. But all that to say, at that time, it was very soon thereafter that the Hellfire Clubs, sort of these very, very satanic secret societies, were set up by leading figures of this Venetian crowd that had taken over. Basically, the without going into detail here, the humanists had one last effort and attempt to regain control. The Thomas More, Erasmus Platonists had fought to take control of England around the time of Queen Anne, who was a completely underappreciated queen, who had there was a fight for policy controls. And for a period under her reign, before she died in 1714, people like Robert Harley, Jonathan Swift, and others were able to get on top of things and push back against the Bank of England faction. These were people who were in close communication with Cotton Mather and other leaders in America itself. There's a book actually by a fellow who I'd recommend everybody can just Google this. It's called How the Nation Was Won by Graham Lowry. He was a late scholar. It was just impeccable. I've read this book 3 times, and it goes through this history perfectly. And they can get this on Amazon. I'll go back to my thing now. But when Queen Anne died, there was a complete coup that was finalized. Britain never became a sovereign nation again. There's nothing that even became close to being an independent actor at that point. It became a complete beast for the oligarchy. But the Hellfire Clubs grew out of this. Ben Franklin was deployed as a young man by Cotton Mather, his tutor, to go and get intelligence and infiltrate this Hellfire Club in the 1720s. That story is also told in Lowry's book, and he was aware that this thing was evil. And these were people that said that no, monetary value. One of the leaders of the Hellfire Club was an economist whose a lot of his ideas were transplanted into Adam Smith and other British imperial economists later on during the American Revolution. But Bernard Mandeville wrote he was the leader of the Hellfire Club, and he wrote something called Private Vices, Public Virtues, arguing that it is only by unleashing our personal vices that society creatively grows and improves by just unbounded sin. So sin is good in his world.
That's weird. Meanwhile, the fact of the matter is civilization's never built like that. Civilization is not about unshackling your most basal carnal desires and letting it spring forth onto society, but it's to safeguard, to put a bit and brittle against those incantations, to war against it, and to seek that which is productive and good. It's a complete complete opposite, Matt, of what works. These people are sick.
Yeah, and that's why when Ben Franklin came back, his entire strategy was enhanced by that experience and those insights that he got. Because they say, manufacturers is bad, too much population is bad because it makes us unruly. Basically, we should worship gold, worship money, use slavery, so we can increase productivity only by having more slaves on our plantation. That's legit. But if you want to have a machine or a factory where you don't use human slave labor, that's not a legitimate way in their world to increase productivity of a society, which goes back to what you were saying about Africa and these green desert tech, solar panels everywhere. That's essentially keeping that continent in a slave situation.
It is.
Now, Ben Franklin, coming out of that experience, unveiled his argument for colonial scrip, for a paper currency that would be tied to the manufacturing and population growth of a society, which his essays are very, very challenging read, but they're readable and very much worth doing. And you can get over a lot of the slander against Ben Franklin because people are like, he was a Hellfire Club, just like the rest of them, he was the same thing. He wasn't really a legit revolutionary. No, I mean, he was doing intelligence work. That's what you have to get your hands dirty sometimes. And he didn't necessarily do the things that they did, but he did intel. And he came back and he completely revolutionized political economy by, again, justifying that a government has the right to emit forms of paper currency for the purpose of manufacturing, paperworks, other things, ironworks, shipbuilding. And one of the young followers of Franklin's philosophy, and there was a whole school built up around that, was Alexander Hamilton. And this guy is vital for the story here because when America, I brought up how after the Revolution, America was bankrupt.
Yes.
It was, and the Articles of Confederation, it was a very divided nation, divided amongst itself. The states, like I said, they had control over their local currencies. There was no unifying program to build up its industries or its manufacturers or its infrastructure. Couldn't be done. And so everyone knew it was only a matter of time before the British Empire could reabsorb them back into the mother hive. This was solved by the incredible work of Ben Franklin, Hamilton, and a few others around that network. There's maybe I'll send you a link that you can share with your audience by Bob Ingram, who's a scholar on this. But basically what Hamilton did, and this is a very important lesson for the current crisis America is in today, is that he said, okay, we're going to consolidate all of the debts of the states into a new debt. So all of the debts that are unpayable, we're going to figure out a way to make them payable, right? By creating for the first time, a federal debt. And that federal debt would then be tied to projects of internal improvements, of building manufacturers, roads, schools, eventually military academies like West Point came out of that, lighthouses, postal services, like all sorts of things that just enhanced and stimulated the growth of the nation. And that then created conditions of wealth and prosperity that could then render that debt extinguished. And he made a point that the only debt worth creating is a debt that is self-extinguishing. That's very different from the IMF or the City of London banks, which need perpetual growing debts, right? Two different worlds of two different intentions. So the way that was done was through primarily issuing bonds that people could then purchase, that would be also purchased by the Treasury, but also a national bank. So he had a national banking system created by the 1790s that then had branches in various states. And from there, the national bank would interface with the Treasury, purchasing bonds that would then justify the creation of public credit currencies that could be monetized, and that were always tied to projects in the benefit of the nation as a whole. The general welfare clause that Hamilton was key in drafting with Franklin and John Jay and others. So everything had to be subservient to the general welfare of the nation. And that national bank was an important instrument to breaking free of the City of London controls. This is the American system of political economy that was later defined in those terms. It wasn't called it then, but it was given that name in the 1820s by Frederick List, a German economist who came in with Marquis de Lafayette into America to help basically organize a new French Revolution that was supposed to be very different from what happened in 1791 and then again in 1830. But they were trying to organize an international movement of Republican movements to overthrow systems of hereditary power in the 1820s. So Marquis de Lafayette, the last surviving leader of the revolution, came in as an old man to organize this. He also helped John Quincy Adams win the elections by 1 vote in 1824. Frederick List stayed behind, and Frederick List organized manuals, books on his studies of the American system that were a refutation of British free trade. And his works are just a joy to read, and people can find them on our website, the risingtidefoundation.net website. If they go to the Library of Alexandria section at the bottom, there's a section on Frederick List, and all of his writings are there. But so he defines it as the American system of national economy. And John Quincy Adams is an adherent, a big fighter for this policy to create a continental national policy of development with rail from coast to coast. And this is what becomes the Zollverein. So it goes in, even though it fails in France. So Marquis Lafayette, there's a whole story there. Maybe we could do a show on that someday. But Marquis Lafayette, upon his return back to France, screws up, gives in to some stupid ideas, and allows the king to be reinstated in 1830. And all of the ambitions to create a world of sovereign republics goes down the drain at that point. But in America, the fight goes on. And the problem is that Hamilton's National Bank is killed by a puppet of Aaron Burr, who had already killed Hamilton, right? In 1804, Hamilton was killed. Aaron Burr was the vice president. I don't think Hamilton thought that the vice president was actually going to risk losing his vice presidency by following through on the duel. At the time, it was common that, to defend your honor, you challenge somebody to a duel, but then you don't actually kill them. You shoot up in the air and just say, okay, our honor is maintained. In this case, it was different. Aaron Burr actually did hate Hamilton enough to give up his vice presidency and kill Hamilton, which is illegal to do that in New Jersey. But when Aaron Burr comes back from Britain, because obviously Britain was more than happy to protect him, he becomes a major power broker in the slave power states, and arranges the rise and ascension of a new British-controlled grouping of political puppets under Martin Van Buren and Andrew Jackson, who basically they fight to undo every internal improvement, every industrial project that the Hamiltonians had fought for, are all under both of these men who were back-to-back presidents. And finally, it culminates with the killing of the National Bank, the Second National Bank, by Jackson, who's today, unfortunately, celebrated both by
like he was doing like he was killing the Rothschild Bank.
That's what they say, right? And that's
the common misconception here. So what really happened? He was actually killing a very Hamiltonian national bank, which is a complete different creature than a central bank, is what you're saying.
Yeah, I used to believe this too, because we all who are truth seekers, and we discovered that there's an international bankers conspiracy, that's been running history. Everybody encounters this.
I killed the bank.
I killed the bank. That's what's on his tombstone, right? What a great mark of pride. He paid the debt. Oh, how great! He paid the debt. At what cost? If you actually look, this narrative was created very early on. This has been something that's been building up for a long time as a sleight of hand. When I say what cost, well, why was there a bank panic, a national panic, and a massive depression in 1837 after he killed the bank? Why? What happened? What caused that panic? Well, he shut down to pay the debt. How did he pay the debt? Well, he shut down every internal improvement that was being built from the 1800s all the way through, all of the Erie Canal, the canal projects, the road projects, all of those things that were infusing real value into the society's economy, right? By actually increasing your productive powers of labor. So all of the actual means of creating value were all shut down. So now, you got a lot of money because you're not spending it on internal improvements anymore. So you can pay the debt. Okay, you just did that. But now you're stagnant. What's also happening? Well, you've deregulated the banks. You've shut down the national banking system, and now you've created conditions where every state and every local bank is now issuing their own local currencies again.
Correct. That's when
Now,
you have the fight of species in between the states. Nobody could redeem anything. Oh, I got a certificate note from Massachusetts Bank saying I have X amount of gold. Well, can I redeem it in New Hampshire? No, you can't.
Exactly. Yeah, and there were thousands. This grew by the beginning of the Civil War, before Lincoln entered office. There was something, I'd written this down. There was something like here it is. There was 1,496 banks in the United States by this time. 7,000 legitimate notes were being issued. 7,000. So one bank was issuing multiple forms of notes.
That's crazy.
There were 5,500 counterfeit notes in circulation. And I mean, my God, the chaos was, like you said, it was insane. There was no nation was willing to invest in America.
And this also sheds to light Andrew Jackson's penchant for slavery.
That's exactly, and
makes sense.
Yes.
So he was serving the British masters.
He was completely serving the British masters, and I mean, the slave power in America was always a British tool within America. This is why the British put so much effort, both politically and economically and militarily, in supporting the Confederate South during the Civil War. But Andrew Jackson, when he committed mass genocide on the Cherokee through the Trail of Tears, what he was doing is he was emptying out all of the lands in the South that the Cherokee had been living on for generations, so that that land could then be given over to cotton plantation owners, that it just enhanced and increased the power of the slave states. Yeah, and the slave economy. So America became increasingly addicted to the slave cheap labor system. They couldn't, it's like a drug addict.
Yes.
When the South became the fourth biggest economy in the world, their whole economy became reliant upon increasing rates of imports of slaves into America at that point to service global the British textile industry.
Right. And could you also give us the name of the proponent, the ardent proponent of slavery and using slavery as a means of economic production? The gentleman's name from the City of London Corporation. What was that guy's name again? I forget. You mentioned it earlier.
Lord Cecil. Oh, are you talking about Bernard Mandeville from the Hellfire Club days?
Yes. That's it. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and his theories were.
What's the name of Bernard Mandeville?
Bernard Mandeville, Private Vices, Public Virtues. The Fable of the Bees is his work, and it's disgusting. Very much worth reading, but not before bed. Yeah, basically, and he's the one who justified the original mass infusion of slaves into the colonies in the 1713 period after the Treaty of Utrecht with Spain, which is when you really started getting mass influxes of black slaves from Africa. Before that, there wasn't a lot of it, but it was always being resisted by the American colonists, who at various times passed legislation before the Revolution, even trying to ban the import of slaves, and it was always blocked and overridden by the City of London and the Board of Trade in London. And Bernard Mandeville was always the guy being used to justify the overriding of the anti-slave movements in America. And even after the Revolution, like by 1793, every single state had either completely banned slavery or had banned the import of new slaves, including Georgia. Every single one, everyone knew that it was on its way out. So it was only through a series of very artificial maneuvers that undid the Hamiltonian Ben Franklin policies, starting with really, unfortunately, Jefferson, who was a mixed bag, but he really messed up badly and was a fool, who enhanced the slave power originally in 1800. But the Aaron Burr machine, like I said, under Van Buren and Jackson, really was the biggest onslaught that undid a lot of the good that had been accomplished beforehand. You had after Jackson, there were two near attempts before Lincoln to bring back this Hamiltonian policy, and the Third National Bank was almost put into motion by President William Harrison in 1840, and he was elected on the basis of a Henry Clay American system tariff policy with internal improvements for the South and the North, and he had a legislation to enact the Third National Bank and undo Jackson's destruction when he swept into office. But he's also known, unfortunately, as the shortest-lived American president who died only 3 months after taking office. Sorry, I just looked at my computer and noticed that it's about to die. Give me 1 moment.
Yeah, go for it. We got 5 minutes left, Matt. So go for it.
All right, cool. So to tie this all back in, there we go. All right. So basically, to tie this all back in, Frederick List goes on, creates the Zollverein to unify Germany using the American experience in the post-American Revolution period. This creates, for the first time, a unified Germany that Otto von Bismarck acts upon. This is a big support base for Lincoln, who is then able to issue greenback currency and 5 to 20 bonds that were tied to the internal improvements of the nation, things like the transcontinental railway and the industrial policy of the North during the Civil War came out of this. Great leaders like Ulysses S. Grant, one of the only Hamiltonians to survive a full 2 terms as the president, was an adherent of this, but as was McKinley, as was Harding before he died mysteriously. Well, McKinley, we know, was killed by a British-run anarchist operation. Also, another lesson to be learned today. Harding died mysteriously, probably of poisoning, in 1923, right before he could finalize an important treaty to unify Germany, Russia, and America together. That's a whole story unto itself. I wrote a paper on that, which I can maybe email to you. And then we really didn't have much until Roosevelt, who was the first really anti-fascist president who revived the Lincoln policy, built the New Deal, used the greenback policy through the Reconstruction Finance Corporation to tie currency to the increased growth and ability to support your nation. And throughout this time, there was always a battle against the British traders in America. JFK tried to bring this back. He did a valiant job for his 900 days while he was in office. He, as we know, did what he did with the Vietnam War, trying to fight to create a silverback currency, to undo the Federal Reserve, and to really create a situation where America was helping nations in the third world become leading first world nations through an international New Deal. That was what JFK's commitment was to African nations, Ghana, the building of the dams in Ghana, as well as South America and beyond. And as well as ending the Cold War by creating a unified cooperative policy with Russia to put a Russian and an American on the moon together, which he announced a month before he died at the United Nations. All of this is based on open system economics, right? Forcing the monetary system, using bonds, using other things to increase humanity's ability to be creative, to sustain more of our species at a higher quality of life in the universe. And I didn't say the Earth, I said the universe. Because the universe is, we are in, the Earth is part of the universe. The universe is something which, I mean, we've only begun scratching the surface, right? So if Trump is successful at avoiding this coup d'etat, martial law, which all of these things are serious dangers right now during this time of turmoil, and he is able to capture a second term, it has to be done in such a way that I think his impulses are correct. And going for a cooperative policy with Russia, with other countries of the Belt and Road matrix, as well, and tie it all to space exploration as the new manifest destiny of the species as a whole, and infuse America's identity back to building for the future, not building for the future the way Carney is saying, which is we need long-term thinking, but we need to do it in a way that lowers our world population. No, we need long-term thinking that increases our population, because we need more people to make more discoveries. We don't need more people to do laboring to do squeegees of solar panels in deserts. We need more people because we need more minds that we value, because every baby is potentially a genius, right? A new Mozart could be that baby that is being euthanized or being that's not being permitted to live because your society is covered by green energy grids or is in war, which empires need to have as a divided whole, right? To control order out of chaos. So we're really at that stage where we're going to get a new system. It's going to be tied to a new set of values, but is it going to be the set of values that people like Plato, Augustine, Cicero, More, Erasmus, Ben Franklin, Harley, is it going to be that current of civilization that is expressed in this new system of values, or is it going to be this Bernard Mandeville sick satanic crowd that really are delusional? So
right, very well said. Mathew Ehret, folks, thank you so much for listening in. Matt's information is right there in the description box. You can contact him there, as well as check out some of his latest works and books, and check out his website as well. thank you so much all for listening in. Matt, thank you so much for being on. And again, folks, subscribe, like, comment, and share. Even though YouTube will do their best to stymie this. Matt, every single time we're on, they cap us at 1,200 on every video, man.
Really?
Yeah.
Amazing.
Even though the real feed, we're seeing like 10, 20, 15,000 views, they cap us 12,000. It's unbelievable. Anyway, just get the word out, folks. It's all about winning the information war and getting the people's minds to think. And with that being said, we're over and out.
Well said.